Everybody knows Alexander the Great. I even asked a man who lives in my walls if he knows Alexander the Great, and he hissed yes. The guy conquered the world by the age of 32. I can't even conquer the world in Crusader Kings 3. What really allowed him to do this? First of all, it's important to note that a lot of Alexander's success should be credited to his father. It was King Philip II who turned Macedon from an unimportant and almost silent voice in Greek politics to a powerhouse that later swallowed half of the world. So I guess you can say that Kim Kardashian and Alexander have something in common. They are both Nepo babies. One was more effective at the whole conquering the world thing. Okay, let's go. The first thing that made them so powerful was the Macedonian Phalanx. We talked about the Phalanx and how it was defeated in our Rome video, but that was way before it. Of course, the Macedonian Phalanx was modeled after the Greek Phalanx, but there was one difference: the length. Meet Sarissa, a spear twice the normal length, 14 to 20 feet long. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine yourself as a member of the Greek Phalanx. You've seen many victories over the years. Then, you face the Macedonian Phalanx, and they have such long spears, and you can't even get close to them. You start getting self-conscious, if your size is enough. You know, everyone says it doesn't matter, but, right now you're getting poked to death by it. It sounds a bit funny. One of the key strategies to victory was to make spears longer. Duh. But the simple truth is that it wasn't possible without proper advancements in woodworking and metallurgy. Even more, it just wasn't a viable tactic back then. That's the interesting part. Every strategy and tactic is designed to counter something, and Macedonian Phalanx encountered Greek Phalanx. It was also hard to carry them and required a lot of discipline. The Macedonian Phalanx had even more vulnerable flanks. That's why later Romans' maniple worked so much better. Oh, so Macedonian Phalanx has weak flanks?
Weak flanks.
Enter the shield bearers. Those were a veteran soldiers unit that was created to be flexible. They could attack fortifications, they could scatter in a free formation, but their primary role was protecting the flanks of Macedonian Phalanx. Another interesting part about Macedonian Phalanx and shield bearers is that it, again, was invented by Philip II and not Alexander. It doesn't mean that Alexander wasn't a good commander, but in this video we discuss the overall strategies. And then in the next one, we'll go over the most famous Alexander's tactical decisions in battle. Let's move on to the thing that Macedonian armies are really famous for, and a thing that you also may remember from the Roman maniple. Drum rolls, please. The cavalry. Cavalry was the real meat of the Macedonian army, the strike force, blasting through the battlefield in a fierce arrow-tip-shaped formation, or a flying wedge. They would strike through the enemy flanks, crushing them in seconds, while the phalanx would finish them off. So why this formation? There were two reasons. First was the ease of communication. Leaders' order in the front would travel effectively, even non-verbally. The second reason is that it was easy to actually maintain this formation. Many formations would scatter after a crash, but not the V formation. I said there were two reasons, and I lied to you. Again! There was a third one. You know how in physics a smaller point of impact would cause more damage? It works here too, and it's devastating. And now we're gonna talk about spears. Yes, again. While phalanxes used sarissas, both cavalry and shield bearers used a complete opposite to them. 12 feet long and very, 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 very light. You'd hold it with one hand. Besides all of these, the Macedonian army, as many others of the time, had lightly equipped skirmishers in the front, whose role was to disrupt enemy formations and constantly harass, reducing morale and confusing the enemy. They also often used ranged weapons. Let's sum everything up. Skirmishers were always first, disrupting and harassing and doing other things later, such as protecting the flanks of cavalry. Then, the powerful and mobile cavalry crushed enemy formations further, allowing phalanxes to do their things with long spears. Skirmishers were still useful in chasing fleeing troops and doing cleanup, sometimes together with shield bearers. In the event of losing, the same shield bearers and phalanxes were great defense units. These tactics won many battles for Philip II and Alexander. But that's not even the most exciting part about these formations. Alexander was famous for his rapid offense, thanks to the one and only hammer and anvil tactics. It won them every war. The anvil was foot companions, or phalanxes. As you may have guessed, their role is to be a static force, to engage the enemy and keep them there. Long sarissas made the enemy's approach or escape particularly hard. And then, from the other side, at the top speed, spears ready, the cavalry would strike, squishing the enemy formation from both sides. They surround them and eventually completely collapse the entire formation. This was the most defining tactic of Macedonians. Of course, it's not just the idea of it, but masterful execution. And this masterful execution wouldn't be possible if the army had low morale, and that's where Alexander shined. He was an absolute expert at speeches, his most famous quote being, "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion." Moreover, Alexander often led the charge himself. He even knew many of his soldiers personally, and all of them were trained rigorously. This is not to say that Alexander was all that great. As often it is with history, his greatness was accompanied by a monstrous side. He was known for being an absolute barbarian, killing his rivals, slaughtering thousands, and completely eradicating entire tribes. He was an alcoholic prone to rage that naturally led to violence. His friends or relatives weren't spared either. When his father died, he almost immediately killed his recent wife and child. There's little information that allows to explain it, but many speculate that it's connected to his deep-rooted insecurities. Of course, this was reflected in his strategies as well. It's hard to ignore how much gathering intelligence helped in winning entire wars, and Alexander was a master at spying, not only enemies, but his own soldiers too. His vast network of spies allowed him to know enemy army sizes and locations before he even knew they existed. He knew everything about politics, resources, and geography. As mentioned before, he even spied on his own soldiers, having informants who would tell him everything about what his soldiers were thinking and saying. In 32 years of his life, Alexander completely changed the world, a controversial figure known for his genius and brutality. As we mentioned in our Rome video, if Alexander decided to go west instead of east, maybe the entire history would change forever, and Rome simply wouldn't exist. Join us next time, where we will discuss Alexander's victories and deeds, and how he used all his tactics in specific battles. Don't forget to like and subscribe.